the most fundamental point is the point that, frankly, Tony made in his charts very helpfully, which is actually the most important thing to know is that we are entering a new era of world history, okay? And to explain it very simply, from the year 1 to the year 1820, as Tony's charts showed, the two largest economies were always those of China and India. And it's only in the last 200 years that Europe has taken off and North America has taken off. But if you view the past 200 years of world history against the backdrop of the past 2,000 years of world history, the past 200 years of world history have been a major historical aberration. Now, all aberrations come to a natural end, and so you're just seeing the return of Asia. And the world is changing. That's why in 1998, I wrote a book called Can Asians Think? In 2018, I just published a book called Has the West Lost It? Question mark. The world is changing. But my second point is a paradoxical one. Why has Asia come back? Who should Asia thank? And the simple answer is that the biggest thank you that Asia needs to give is to Western universities. Because Western universities have actually powered the return of Asia, and they continue to do so. Just even this year, and I think you saw some statistics in Tony's slides. Even now, as we speak, there are over 350,000 Chinese students studying in American universities. I haven't mentioned Europe. And then you have about another 180,000 Indian students studying in American universities. So it is these universities and the reverse brain drain that has led to the rise of Asia. So the question, therefore, is, as we now enter the Asian century, is the Asian century going to be powered still by Western universities or by Asian universities also? And that's the challenge that our panelists face, because that's the question that they have to address. And it's not, frankly, an easy question to address, because, frankly, as the world is changing in so many dimensions, the chemistry of the world is changing in so many dimensions, are you going to ask the Asian universities to still continue to climb the same mountains that the Western universities climb? Or do Asian universities now find their own mountains and say, we have a different destination to go up to? And it could be in many different ways. And in fact, yesterday, as the minister was hinting, what is the additional roles that universities play, especially in the Asian context, in terms of providing jobs, improving the society, and so on and so forth. So there may be different responsibilities that Asian universities have to undertake. So it's a very different world and different challenges. And so to answer these questions, you're going to have these three very distinguished panelists. I'm not going to introduce them because you have the introductions in the book assigned to you. But we're going to go in the order of having Ling, the provost of NTU, speak first, followed by Devang from Mumbai, and then Asma from Universiti Sains Malaysia. And after that, we'll have a robust discussion. And please, I hope you will think of the most difficult questions you can think of, because I found that the more difficult the questions, the easier it is for the panelists to answer. So, Ling, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kishore. All right, so I must first thank Tony for helping me save a lot of time, because he covered about half of what I wanted to say already. Just less
so you got 5 minutes only.
No, I still have 10 minutes, but I can exercise the right to shorten it. So we saw that the rankings, THE rankings came out last night. For whatever it's worth, if you look at the top 100 universities, in 2011, there were 10 from Asia, and last night we saw 12. Well, do you call that a rise? It depends on how you interpret. But the truth is, yes, there are two more. But as Tony has mentioned in his talk as well, so you see a mixed situation. But the rise is concentrated in a few economies. So we took a deeper dive into these 12 universities to look at, first of all, a rather narrow measure, citations. So this is the field-weighted citation index. One thing you do see that is really common to all these 12 universities is they've all risen, and fairly significantly, in this citation index. Well, so in some sense, we can say that yes, probably there is a good correlation between research, the increase and the strengthening of research with the rise of these universities. But yesterday morning, we heard quite a few talks and discussions on just what the right measure should be for the kind of impact that universities should have. So Minister mentioned quite a few things, including beyond research, on industry, on society, community, government, and so on. So I thought, well, instead of trying to cover too much ground, I will just share a little bit about the NTU experience, NTU Singapore. We have seen a complete transformation of NTU in a rather short span of time. So NTU was established in 1991, the same year as Hong Kong UST. It started off essentially as a teaching university. I mean, the focus was very much, the mandate was very much to educate and train enough graduates for the Singapore economy. It was only about the mid 2000s, so 2005, 2006 or so, where we changed that mission. We decided that we really needed to become research intensive, and that was when, okay, things started to move very, very fast in terms of hiring, in terms of putting in place strategies to ramp up research. But over the past 13 years, when we decided to do this, one of the strategies was really to partner to partner other institutions, including universities, but also industry or other organizations, to broaden the kind of exposure we have, to broaden the capabilities. So we seek partners with complementary strengths to enlarge our research agenda. What you see on this slide is just a small selection of the kind of partners we have cultivated over the past decade or so. It includes a mixture of universities, research institutes, as well as industry partners and other organizations. Now, I would just talk very briefly about these top few in the box. You will see a mixture of academia and non-academia. Let me start by focusing on the non-academic ones: Smithsonian, Rolls-Royce, Interpol, and WHO. In each of these cases, the partnership was established because of who we are and where we are. What do I mean by that? Well, where we are in Asia. We are in Singapore. And that creates a very interesting opportunity for each of these partners. For example, the Smithsonian is very interested in building up biodiversity, learning about biodiversity, forest ecology in Asia. And so we became a very natural partner as we ramp up our ecology for them to enter this space. WHO is working with us on digital health and digital health education. And again, Singapore, being one of the most advanced Asian cities, is a very natural hub for them. Interpol wants to increase its presence in Singapore, and so we are working together on darknet cybersecurity. Again, for very good reason. And Rolls-Royce has a good operation here, but at the same time, they have found some of the expertise in power and control engineering, as well as complex systems, analytics, a very interesting proposition to them. So they have given multiple millions for that. Then the other three are university partners. Again, they are here from North America, from London, or from China for different reasons, right? For the UBC case, we partner because it's a project on active living for the aged. And again, they found Singapore a very interesting proposition. They found NTU's expertise a good complement. Now, Tony mentioned in his talk earlier, if you're good, if you have expertise that others find attractive, they will naturally want to work with you. So I cannot echo that more, right? The Sino-Singapore Joint Research Institute, we partner with South China University of Technology in Guangzhou. It's based there. That is really interesting. We have quite a number of IP generated that they are very good at translation. So this partnership is very effective. It helps us broaden our translation influence. Finally, Imperial, I cannot not mention that, is our medical school. It's not research, it's really education, innovative way of approaching medical education. And what is very interesting now is that they're exporting that model back to Imperial. Okay, so that's our experience. It's a win-win situation. You just need to make sure that you find your niche and people will want to work with you. Let me finish by repeating some of the things that actually Tony shared. So,
2 minutes.
Thank you. What do you need to sustain all this growth? I think first and foremost, people. You need to have the right people, the best people possible. That goes without saying. Without that, none of the other bullet points can exist. You need to have very strong research, innovation, and enterprise. In our case, we have succeeded in ramping up our research. I would say that for innovation and enterprise is work in progress. We still have a lot of room for improvement. You need to be innovative in education. You need to this is our core mission as a university, and it is also looking for training the manpower. Internationalization, I've said. Infrastructure, needless to say, you can have grand plans without that, okay, nothing will ever take off. And finally, strong leadership, visionary leadership. Governance, Tony has spoken at great length about. Resources, well, money and other kinds of resources. So I was just stop there with 1 minute to spare.
Thank you for sticking to 10 minutes. I thought of a difficult question for you.
Yes.
And you can answer it later.
Sure.
You mentioned that NTU was set up in 1991, but you also, as you know, have historical links with the former Nanyang University, and that university was set up, by the way, it was one of the first universities to try and educate the overseas Chinese and give them a chance to compete in the British-dominated environment. But today, in today's context, relations between China and Southeast Asia will become difficult in the next 10 to 20 years. Take my word for it. What role can universities play in trying to build bridges within China and Southeast Asia? Because you mentioned your collaboration.
Yes.
Also. So that's a dimension that we also want to address if we look at other roles of universities. But let me now turn to Devang and say you have 10 minutes now.
Sure.
And I'll think of an equally difficult question for you.
So good evening. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's been a really very
is the
interesting.
microphone working? Yeah, okay.
You can hear what I'm saying? Yeah, so it's been really very interesting and very informative 3 days for me. Kishore started with a really very interesting premise that I had not thought of before, is that Asia is being driven by universities of the West, and really I think that I agree with. And but at the same time, when I think of, let's say, a country like India, 180,000 students, maybe 200,000 students are studying abroad. But we have, maybe 23 million studying in India. So in a sense, you know, there is a great responsibility for universities and educational institutions within the country to really generate the right kind of manpower to power the Indian economy. And like all the Asian universities, we've already seen the tremendous rise of Asian universities. I think you will see a similar kind of rise in India as well. So in none of the graphs, we saw the field-weighted citation index for Indian universities. But even those are rising. They have not hit very large numbers yet, but they are rising. And the rise is because of the manpower coming back. You know, excellent people are returning in what Professor Chan mentioned as the reverse brain drain. I come from an institution called IIT Bombay. It's a 60-year-old institution, and it's the most highly desired place to study in India. So just to give some numbers, about 1.3 million students give an entrance exam in the first stage. Out of that, the top 200,000 give a second exam, and then the top 10,000 out of those get into the IITs. So you know, we get really very bright students who come here, come into the institution. And in recent times, almost all our faculty are trained, either their PhD or postdoctoral studies are in one of the either Western or even one of the very good Asian universities like NUS and NTU or from Japan. And I think these universities, though they are not making it up at very high ranks, they are making a big contribution. And my premise is that the universities may be doing better than the rankings reflect. Because most of these universities are doing research, and this research has many positive outcomes which go beyond the conventional metrics like citations or number of papers and things like this. I feel that research very significantly impacts the education that we provide our students. They get an exposure to innovation, it develops their creativity, and of course, it really helps our faculty to keep up to date in their field. Our main product, of course, is the education we provide the students. And when these students go into industry or academia, they contribute for maybe 30, 40 years. And that has a real impact on how the economy performs. Research that these universities do also addresses local problems which may not be addressed by the major universities of the world. It encourages innovation and often results in startups. And finally, of course, research results in a pool of expertise which informs government policy. And Brian Smith mentioned all these things on the first day. We see this impact in many institutions in Asia, and I saw this at IIT Bombay, having been there since 1987. I saw firsthand the impact that the institute had on the growth of the IT industry in India. Nobody had heard of the IT industry until the late 90s, and suddenly it mushroomed. And what I saw was that a very large number of our alumni were involved in many sectors of that economy. A decade later, the internet economy has bloomed in India. We have some companies that are like Amazon, some companies that are like Uber and so forth, and a large number of these. And again, I see alumni of our institute playing a major role in developing that. And many of these companies now are of very large size on a world scale. They're moving out of India and so forth. I've also seen firsthand the contributions of the Institute to social sector projects and to development of government's policy. Our students, I feel, have benefited significantly from all these linkages. So, I mean, the point that I'm broadly making is that if we really want to go up in the rankings, a very significant investment has to be made in high-end research, which may or may not be affordable for so many institutions within a country like India. But even at the level of investment, the research that is being done is making an important contribution. Another very important aspect, I feel, and I think that was one of the questions that was raised in for this session, was the question of international linkages. I feel international linkages have helped Asian universities rise. And I've seen this in my institute as well. We have taken a number of initiatives which are focused on primarily postgraduate education. And I just wanted to briefly talk about one major initiative, which is a joint PhD program with Monash University. And next month, this program will complete 10 years. This is a really large program. I think it's the largest such joint PhD program in the world, and all of you are here, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The students that enter this program spend 3 years in IIT Bombay and 1 year in Monash University. Each student has an advisor in each institute, and we've set up facilities so that students can interact with both advisors on a regular basis. So, even when they're in Australia, they talk to the Indian advisors and vice versa. Currently, we have 180 students on the rolls of this program. There are more than 100 faculty members from, okay, I'll just wrap up. There are more than 100 faculty members from each university who participate as advisors, and we will graduate our 100th student in this year. The program runs across all faculties of both universities, and we have incorporated a non-profit company which is jointly owned by the two universities with its own CEO and staff to run the operation. Of course, there were many challenges which were overcome, but this student has really benefited, the program has really benefited the students because they get an international experience and they learn to operate in a new environment of research where collaborators may be on different continents. We are able to attract the best of students to this program, and we are keeping track of the alumni, and we find they're doing really well. Of course, there are challenges and there are many overheads for such programs, and I'd just like to mention that both sides continue to be very enthusiastic about the program, primarily because the program attracts such excellent students. So as long as we get good students, I'm sure that this program will go on. So I see both international linkages as well as the effort to do research at whatever level, making a big contribution to education of students and their contribution to the growth of the economies.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I also have a very difficult question for you.
Okay.
One of the most fascinating experience I had was to give a talk to an organization called the Indus Entrepreneur, TIE, in the Silicon Valley. And when you go to the Silicon Valley, what's shocking is how successful the Indians are in Silicon Valley. And you mentioned the contributions of IIT graduates to the IT industry in India too. But there's such an enormous gap between the extraordinary performance of Indians overseas. You think even Microsoft and Google are run by Indians. Look at the number of business schools in America run by Indians. And yet, you have this extraordinary performance overseas, but no matching universities within India that even come into the top 100. There's a huge disparity there, and I want you to reflect on that. So when you come to your question, you can try to explain that disparity that exists in the world. Asma, I got even more difficult question for you, but first I'll let you speak. Asma Ismail, the vice-chancellor, Universiti Sains Malaysia.
Okay.
Over to you, Asma.
Right. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to shift base. Instead of talking about the rise of Asian universities, I want to talk about the rise of Southeast Asian universities, right? Because obviously there is a difference between, glaring difference between the have and the have-nots, right? You have the developing economies of Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and outside of Singapore, you have the developed economies. So the question then is that how do we now, the universities in Southeast Asia, how do we now formulate our model to be able to move up and continue to be relevant? So because we don't have very much funding, we therefore need to do what matters to us, what will be the model that we will use. And with the advent of globalization and the disruptive technologies, how do we ensure that Malaysian higher education is still respected, is still relevant, and is still referred? So in the year 2000, the Malaysian government has a dream of wanting to make Malaysia an international hub for higher education. Of course, you're going to ask the question, are we crazy? Because 45 minutes away from Kuala Lumpur is Singapore, which is, of course, the top-ranked university in the country. Why would now international students, instead of going to Singapore, why would they want to come to Malaysia? So this is where we then decide, okay, let's strategize, because we believe that we can deliver. We believe that we can make a spot for to become the hub for international higher education. So we open up private universities in Malaysia, and we open up transnational education. We now have about 11 to 13 branch campuses from UK, from USA, from Australia, from China, that is now in Kuala Lumpur and in Johor, to be able now to attract foreign students to come into the country. But being Malaysians, we are very nationalistic. We believe that this is not good enough. Malaysian universities must anchor if we were to be the international hub for higher education. So we then established in 2006 research universities. And among the public universities, 5 research universities were then named, including Universiti Malaya, Universiti Sains Malaysia, UTM, UKM, and UPM. So we have that. And the mandate for becoming a research university is to be the engine of growth for the nation. That means we gotta be able to create wealth for the country, but at the same time we need to create societal impact, societal well-being. And basically, with the exception of Universiti Malaya, all of the other universities in Malaysia is less than 50 years old. And the problem is that we want to be an international hub for higher education, yet none of the universities are listed. Okay, this is the problem that we face in the year 2006. So this is our chance of formulating the model. Either we play the ranking game, or we come up with something that is truly Malaysian and see whether our model will now work and be able to provide jobs, be, as I said, relevant, respected, and referred. So this is where we stand a chance now, and we formulated what we know as MIRA, Malaysian Research Assessment Tool. We studied all the rankings and the various rankings for QS and THE, and we then come up with our own, and we say that for Malaysian universities, we gotta be going beyond research and publication. So we included in the MIRA assessment the performance and impact of Malaysian universities to the industry, our impact to the government, and our impact to the community. So even this morning, we are still talking about the triple helix, about university, industry, and society. University, industry, and the government. So, but bottom line, in Malaysia, we talk about dealing with the quadruple helix, right? So going beyond academia to be able now to create impact to the industry, to the government, and to society. And it was music to my ears when we listened to the Minister of Education of Singapore, when he said that it's high time that ranking of universities go beyond academia to be able to now work with the quadruple helix as well. For at least for Malaysia, we have been doing that since 2006. So with the MIRA assessment, let me now share with you, since 2006, I told you none of our universities are ever listed anywhere. But since within 5 years of having MIRA, the five research universities moved up in the rankings. And we continue to move upwards, but balance with impact to the quadruple helix. So did we manage to become the international hub for higher education? I would say so, because by 2014, UNESCO ranked Malaysia as the 12th most favorite destination for foreign students. So today, we now have 200,000 foreign students now studying in Malaysia. And the 5 research universities, we studied this and we found that the anchor is not the branch campuses, but rather the anchor is the 5 research universities that has now been able to attract postgraduate studies to now, postgraduate students to now study in Malaysia. We are now top 8 in the ASEAN universities, top 50 among the Asian universities, and if you consider top 50 under 50 years of age, we now rank at the top 14 universities in the country. So this shows to you that we can have our own model and be able to now move in the ranking, but at the same time be relevant to what is needed by the of the country as well. So to show to you, there was a question asked just now. Would you see, to Tony, I believe, would you see an Asian university in the top 10 or even top 100 in the next decade? And what is that the Asian universities can now contribute? I would say that for at least for Malaysia, we can contribute to humanity, because our tagline is from brains to business to humanity. Right? So bottom line is that there is a possibility for us to be able to contribute this way. Because we followed the advice of Ahmad Zuel, the Nobel laureate. If you work on what the West is doing, you will be 20 years behind. But if you work on what the West is not interested in, you will be 20 years ahead. That, in essence, is Blue Ocean strategy. And this is where we now focus our research, our innovation, to be able to help the people of the marginalized. And this is working now, research, to be able to move in low resource settings. So this is something that we see as a blue ocean and has created a lot of patents, it has created a lot of papers, and we're moving in health, we're moving in agriculture, and at the same time, we're also moving in the high-end technologies. So, and to show the impact to society at Universiti Sains Malaysia, we now say, okay, how can we now have cross-border collaborations? So we form what we call as Asia Pacific University Community Engagement Network, whereby we provide the solutions now to help the people of the poor in the various parts of Southeast Asia. And we find that there are many like-minded universities that is also very much into this. So we have 93 universities from 19 countries around the world that is also now joining together with us to be able to create that impact to society. So, so ladies and gentlemen, Malaysian universities may not yet be listed in the top 100 for the THE, but if you look at QS, is already, Universiti Malaya is already in the top 100 in the QS ranking, but this year, as being released, is now in the top 350. So we are happy for that, but Universiti Sains Malaysia, we are in the 600 to 800. But more important is that we believe that if we excel in our fundamentals, which is moving up the quadruple helix, all right, if we move up in the ranks, it is a bonus as far as we are concerned. But we are also okay if we are not in the top 100, as long as we are #1 in the hearts and minds of the people, because then we know that we are the pulse for the nation. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, and thank you for speaking less than 10 minutes. Okay, I think I'm going to ask you my difficult question so you can think about it while the other two answering the first two difficult questions. You know, Malaysia, like Singapore, like other Southeast Asian countries, you know, has had a brain drain. Some of the best students go overseas, and so far, unlike China and India, there hasn't been a big enough reverse brain drain coming back to Southeast Asia or coming back to Malaysia. So I wonder, with your new project to create Malaysia as a kind of international education center, and when you bring in faculty, are you getting a reverse brain drain of Malaysians coming back also? Because I can tell you, for example, when I stepped down as Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in December last year, my successor was a former Malaysian. So I wonder whether you've had more Malaysians coming to Malaysia. So we start with you, San Ling. What role can universities in Southeast Asia play in building bridges within Southeast Asia and China?
Okay. You mentioned the history of NTU. So for those of you who are not familiar, so before 1991, so in 1955, there was this private Chinese language university called Nanyang University that was built, that was established basically by the Chinese community in Southeast Asia, right? And so with the changing times and so on, so Nanyang University stopped operating, I think it was 1980 or 81. It was absorbed into NUS. But then NTU got established on that campus that was formerly that of Nanyang University. Now, because of this link, so we share quite a bit of the same name, right? With Nanyang Technological University, whereas the predecessor was Nanyang University. So we started off with a natural advantage that people assume naturally that we would have a deeper engagement with things Chinese. And we actually managed to seize this opportunity to be a very early university that engaged China. More than 25 years ago, we started some public administration programs for Chinese officials, young Chinese officials. This has continued on for the past 25, 26 years now. It has grown. An outcome of that is, so we have a huge China alumni base. It's more than 23,000 now in China. Now, I strongly believe that universities have a unique opportunity and role to exert a positive influence in international relations. I think many of us can probably attest to this experience, right? Those of us who have spent time studying in a university or spend significant amount of time in a university abroad, very naturally, most of the time, we will develop an affinity for that country as well as for that university. And so we saw that happening in our case. So our Chinese alumni are very attached to NTU and to Singapore. So we are very happy that here we have played a very positive role. So I think what we need to do is to continue to make sure that the universities remain relevant and of interest to others. So much so that, so for Kishore's question, okay, here we're talking about China, so much so that the universities or companies in China, or even government organizations in China, would want to work with us to create a greater good in a win-win situation. But that will help to improve bilateral relations. One more quick thing. Singapore, is being part of ASEAN, is uniquely positioned to facilitate also China-ASEAN kind of interaction through the universities. Good. So, yeah.
Thank you. Now we know if relations between China and Southeast Asia become difficult, we'll call NTU.
Notwithstanding our contribution.
Okay, Devang, your question.
Yeah.
How do you explain the disparity? What's your answer?
So I think that broadly addresses, or it sort of is related to my broad thesis that what I was trying to make. It turns out that TIE was actually founded by Kanwal Rekhi, who's a 1968 alumnus of IIT Bombay.
Yeah. I met
And
him.
he's an iconic entrepreneur. And of course, I know him really well. And he attributes his success to the outstanding education that he got as an undergraduate. And in fact, when he went to Michigan State University, his professors were worried, you're coming from India, will you be able to cope with this high level of, courses? But, he did extremely well. I mean, he found it all very easy. So I think this is really the point, that you can have an institution which gives a great education, even though its research performance may not be so great. So when Kanwal graduated in 1968, I think the level of research, you can say, is absolutely zero. But our professors were all from research universities, from MIT, Ohio State, and really from the top institutions, who were all themselves good researchers, but there was absolutely no resources for doing research. When I joined IIT Bombay in 1987, even then resources were very meager. There were almost no graduate students. And of course, there's been a now exponential growth of research funding, number of students and so forth, number of graduate students, number of PhD students. And we see our research performance improving. But the key fact is that there's always been a very strong emphasis on providing an outstanding education to the students. And I think they do well. They do well in the US, but they do extremely well in India also. I think if you go and look at the top companies of India, you will see CEOs from the IITs. If you, in fact, in all sectors of, you'll see ministers from IIT, you'll see in the NGO sector, Supreme Court lawyers and so forth. So I think it's primarily the kind of education that we provide, and I could go on for a little bit, but it's a very strong sort of, I would say that there's an environment that has been created within the campus in which challenges the students and which creates an environment which enables them to excel. And I think that makes a huge difference.
I think the most impressive statistics you gave is about the number of applicants, 1.25 million first round, I think. And I remember Tom Friedman, I think, said in one of his columns, when the Indians applied to an IIT, when they're asked to nominate a safety school, the safety school is MIT.
So many of our students do get admitted to MIT, but they prefer to complete their undergraduate studies here and then go.
I mean, that's an indication of how the rankings don't capture sometimes the realities.
Well, I think the rankings are fine. I think it gives a reasonable estimate of how well you're doing as a research university. And what I feel is that to do really well as a research university, you need big investment in terms of equipment and research facilities and so forth. That will happen, and usually there is a sort of, the institute makes contributions like the Malaysian universities are doing to society. The government feels, that it's worthwhile to invest more in research in these places, and so it builds up. So I think that is a natural progression, and you will see Indian universities move up the rankings. The rankings measure something that is important, and they measure how well we do as a research university compared to all the other research university. But in terms of the education that we provide, I think, that's a different story altogether.
Okay, so please get ready. Your difficult questions. I'll be coming to the floor in a second. After Asma, can you answer the question about the reverse brain drain?
Yeah, I would have to say that we don't have very much a reverse brain drain. Let me put it this way. When I listened to the opening speech by the president of NUS, Professor Ng, and you mentioned that you send about 3,000 to 7,000 students overseas. As I said yesterday, to the top, Stanford and all the top universities. As I said yesterday, when the sky opens, for Singapore, when the sky opens, money drops. With Malaysia, when the sky opens, only the rain drops. Right? So bottom line, there's no way we can send that number of people. But we do manage to send 300 students every year to the top 100 ranked universities of the world. MIT, Imperial, Harvard, Oxford, Princeton, we send them there. And this is important for you to note that the Malaysian education qualified our students to be able to attend these very universities. And now they have returned. And I'm one of the beneficiaries of the scholarship. It's not a loan, it's a scholarship that is sent, that we send out the students. They have to return, and now they are returning, and they are now giving back to the university and to the country. And we have managed to create an ecosystem that will allow now for them to be able to publish, for them to be able to do research. We provide grants that will now take from the entire R&I value chain, from fundamental to applied to technology development to translational to setting up of enterprises. So all that we have provided as a country to allow now them to stay and to be able to create the impact that we need. So ladies and gentlemen, when Malaysian universities move up in the ranking, like I said, we don't have that kind of funding. We can't afford to attract the best from the global researchers to be able to move our universities. So when we move up in the ranking, although we are not very fast compared to Singapore, but when we move up, it's totally Malaysians. So it is done by us to make sure now that we're able to move, but at the same time, as I said, there's a need for us to balance between moving up in the rankings and be able to now help in terms of society and nation building. And I look forward, Phil, to the SDG indicators that you've been talking about to see whether now we can see whether, and USM at least, or at least the Malaysian universities would want to be able to be considered for the SDG and see whether that will be creating the impact.
Thank you. Okay, the floor is open. We have about 10 minutes. I see Andrew, right? Andrew? Yes. Andrew, Professor Andrew Wee, can you pass the microphone? Can you, maybe if you stand up, Andrew, the microphone come to you.
Hello, I'm Andrew from NUS. Kishore, I know you like difficult questions and you like to make bold predictions. So my question is, will the halo effect of the traditional top Western universities prevent an Asian university from being #1 in the THE rankings in this Asian century?
And the question is supposed to?
You.
To me. I thought it's my job to ask difficult questions. Okay, let me try my stab at answering the question. You're absolutely right. There is always a time lag in the reputation game, right? So for now, everyone, you ask for the world's top universities, and of course all the names come out: Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and so on and so forth. And so it takes a lot of time before the people begin to understand that there are alternative models being developed. And that's why my question to Tony in the previous session was, in which area will an Asian university break through and become clearly not just #1, but #1 by a mile, you know? And I think when that happens, you know, when it's so clear that the Asian university is not just ahead, but way ahead of a field, then I think the people's mindsets will begin to change. And by the way, you know, I'm saying, speaking very candidly, as someone who actually grew up in a British colony, even though the political decolonization of Asia finished in the 1960s, I would say the mental decolonization happened 20 to 30 years later. It's always a time lag. But I think since then, of course, today, if you travel around Asia, what I find is sometimes quite astounding is the explosion of cultural confidence in Asia. And I think it's this explosion of cultural confidence in Asia is actually going to drive Asian universities to try and do exceptionally well in some areas. And then when the evidence comes in, then you will see the change happening. But you know, even now when you travel in the West, when you tell them, by the way, the world has changed, and in purchasing power parity terms, Eng Chai said it will happen in 2032 for the nominal market terms. But in purchasing power parity terms, already number 1 is China, number 2 is United States, number 3 is India, number 4 is Japan. 3 out of the top 4 countries in the world, 3 out of the top 4 economies in the world in PPP terms are already Asian. And if you ask the man in the street, they don't know about this. They have no idea that this power shift has already happened. So there's a time lag. So in the same way, there will be also a time lag before there's a recognition of Asian universities. The lady over here. I know you've asked lots of questions, so I'll give others a chance. Yes, please. And if you don't mind, can you identify yourself? Yeah.
I am Huda Al-Amil, rector of Princess
Can you speak a bit louder? Yeah.
Yeah, I am Huda Al-Amil, rector of Princess Noura University in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
Saudi
the
Arabia.
largest female university in the world. So I totally
The largest female university in the world?
in the world, yes. We
Wow.
have 45,000 students, and we have almost most disciplines in the university.
I must confess, I hadn't heard of it. My
You
apologies.
haven't heard of our university?
Yeah. Sorry.
This is the problem.
I think you should market yourself.
Okay. I totally agree with what I just heard, because in our university we really focus on providing the best training of our students. Our government now focus on empowering women, and we really need to focus also on this on our university. So we are focusing on our educational program, on our teaching strategies, and on our research to find the best way really to train and qualify our students and prepare them for the future of our country. So I would like really to see sometimes a measurement for the impact of universities on the local society, and
On-
how
on the
universities meet
Society.
Okay, yeah.
how universities meet the expectations of society and the expectations of the leadership of the country. This is just the comment and the question. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's a good point. Maybe Asma, you want to start by,
No, I
in some way she reinforces
Yeah.
your message, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So I truly agree with because at the end of the day, universities are established due to public funding, and there is a need for the public to know what have we done for them. It is okay for us to now use publications and whatnot, but at the end of the day, with all this new stock of knowledge, the question is, what have we done with that knowledge? And that is very important for us to be able to show to the community that we can take from the bench to the community, right? So that is why we say community engagement is one way, so that we can listen to what exactly is it that the community wants. Because I think it's enough about us living in an ivory tower and we say this is the best for the community. I think it's very important that we undergo knowledge exchange, so that we now listen to what exactly that the community wants. Then we come back to the laboratory and we start to design. And this time when we design it with the quadruple helix, with the industry, the government, and the community together, so that now when we produce the results, it is something that can now be assimilated, you know, that people can now use, people will say this is relevant for them. So this is how we are now approaching the way we do research now in Malaysia.
Devang, you want to add something on that? Or?
Yeah, I think that it is for the government, and really they have to set up mechanisms to evaluate how a public university is doing, and that need not come within, I don't know if you are suggesting it should come within the ranking framework. That need not come. I think it's for the government to decide how they will evaluate public universities, and based on that they can decide to support more
we have
or
a system
take
in
other
Israel.
actions.
Yeah, I would like to add. We have
Good.
a system in our country to evaluate the performance of universities. But I mean, also for the ranking, if there is a way that there will be a recognition for the efforts of universities in serving the community and achieving
Yeah.
the goal of the
Okay,
country
your
and
point is that you should also take into consideration local contributions when you do the rankings. Yeah. Okay, your colleague, please. Yeah. Go ahead. Again, if you introduce yourself, yeah.
Yeah, Huda Luhaibi, Princess Noura University,
Yeah.
same institution. My question to Dr. Asma, your experience is very inspiring in moving your university to be in the map of ranking for young universities under 50 years of age. Could you please tell me or summarize what are the most important factors that expedite the process of being in the ranking map? Thank you.
Like I said, we have the Malaysian Research Assessment tool. That Malaysian Research Assessment have what it takes to pace the Malaysian universities to now move up in terms of publication, in terms of research, in terms of index, age index, in terms of innovation, all that. So the Malaysian Research Assessment has 4 areas. One is research and publication, innovation that comes with that, our ability to collaborate with the industry, and the kind of impact that we can create to society. So we can share with you later what we need. But every time when we raise the bar, and universities have now to move up, so that's how we pace the university. So that is how we start to move in the ranking. In fact, Myra was presented to the OIC ministers of education, and they have requested to have a look at Myra too, to see whether it can also be applied to the OIC countries, to be able to now move the OIC together.
Yeah, I'm going to add a slightly politically incorrect point, okay? Because I do that from time to time. You know, I've been to many Arab countries, and I find it very puzzling that even though the record is clear that the center of the world's economy has shifted to East Asia, and if you want to look at the future, you come to East Asia, I find when I travel in the Arab world, most Arabs still continue to look at Europe as the future. But frankly, Asia is the future. And if you can persuade your fellow Arab societies to look at Asian models, especially Southeast Asian models, and I would say especially what's happening in Indonesia, Malaysia, then I think you will find that the paths of success will be quite different. But that takes a psychological revolution that will happen. A quick point, and then I'm afraid I see this red clock blinking away here.
We are adopting the best practices in Europe, America, and Asia. We don't only focus on European experiences. And we have almost more than 100,000 students studying abroad on scholarships, and they are part of the universities are in Korea, Singapore, China, everywhere. And we have also collaboration, for example, with many Asian universities.
Okay. Now the mic, when you pass the mic front, the most persistent questioner gets the last question as a reward.
Thank you very much. This question is for Provost Ling. And NTU's research performance is really excellent in the past few years. So, the citation rates are very fast. So my question is, what do you do to make it happen, and what policies do you implement it to stimulate the faculty members? Thank you.
Yeah, give us your secrets, come on.
There's no secret. In my presentation, in the last slide, the first bullet point I said is people. You just need to hire the best people possible. And I'm not just talking about research. I'm talking about both research and education. So we had a unique opportunity about 10 years ago where we could go on a hiring spree. So we did. We populated our faculty ranks with young, hungry, energetic scholars. And so what we see today is really an outcome of what we sowed 10 years back. Right? So people is fundamental.
So I think, you know, this has been the last panel, and I'm sure you're all a bit exhausted, but I hope at least one thing you could take away from this panel is that if you believe, and I guess the data will show it, that the 21st century will be the Asian century, and that Asian universities will play, in a sense, a bigger role in the years to come. You got a glimpse of the future from this panel. So thank you very much. Please join me in thanking them. Thank you.